what was it, about 4 weeks ago, I woke up one morning and I was feeling really ropey and I had a bit of a headache and a little bit of a tickly cough. My brother-in-law is a GP. So whenever I get ill, whenever any of us get ill, we always turn to him and we ask him. And so I phoned him up and I was like, Mark, I'm feeling a bit rough, got a tickly cough, bit sweaty and stuff. He said, have you experienced a sudden loss in taste? And I went, no, I always dress like this. Hey, everybody, it's the LoveCrafts Show. My name's Mr. X-Stitch.
And I'm Merion.
And we're here to talk about love, crafts, and everything in between. Merion, who's our special guest?
Well, get ready for this, our first show of the season. And we've got the fantastic Lydia Morrow, artist, designer, champion of slow fashion, and amongst millions of other things, Lydia. I mean, you just are supersonic on every level.
Including groaning at jokes. I'm so sorry.
No, that's what they're there for. We've got those. I try and, if we can have a healthy pause in between after a joke where there's just an echoey silence, I know I've achieved my goal there. You're sort of an omni talent, aren't you? You know, some people are like a triple threat. And then you're like an omni threat because you are threatening. You've got so many skills.
Very threatening as a person, I would say. No, yeah, I think that stems from me getting really easily bored. So I'm just like, oh, okay, I've done this for a couple months. I guess probably I should completely change my career and my entire art practice for another few months before I get bored of that.
Lydia, everything on your Instagram is picture perfect. It's so beautiful. You know, the colours, the photography, it's just so inspirational. And when you sort of get down and start reading, obviously all the things that you talk about are so inspirational as well. Where did this talent come from? Were you an artist as a child? Were you arty when you were little?
Thank you very much. My family is really creative. I've always grown up with like drawing and writing as kind of like central. My family certainly valued arts education a lot higher than a lot of other types of education in certain ways. I was always singing and writing poetry and drawing just constantly 24/7. And there's a lot of things in which I've grown and changed quite significantly, but it has like such a huge effect for me and the rest of my siblings anyway, growing up with that like really creative household.
It's so nice, isn't it, to have that, you know, a lot of people like now are sort of letting sort of art education and all of those things, they sort of come second because everybody's so obsessed with ranking, you know, and being at the top of maths and the top of this, the top of that. And I think a bit like music, you know, that sort of slipped down the ratings in education should be right up at the top because it's so important and it informs who we are as a person. I mean, that must have been a very lovely, supportive childhood for you to really help to build the skills that you have now.
Yeah, I think there's just something about a confidence that comes with expressing yourself artistically. Obviously, like I was a real nerd at school, so I was always trying to achieve very highly academically as well. But I think it's quite nice when you are learning how to do things in the arts. I'm quite like a stickler for achievement, but when the goal has to be just expressing yourself and enjoying yourself, you're kind of allowing yourself to let go of a lot of that, like, I'm going to do it really well, because then really well is just on your own terms.
Definitely. So did you study fashion?
No, I just studied fine art, like painting and printmaking.
Fine art.
Yeah, you started doing painting and printmaking, didn't you?
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting. It's an interesting how you transitioned. I spin back through your Insta as is my wont, and I know in 2014 was the first time you had a go at knitting. But before that, you were very papery, printy. And I mean, do you still feel that technique comes through your work now? Do you still feel like you're a printmaker?
Yeah, well, I actually started knitting when I was like 7 because I wanted to. And my mum just sent me over to our neighbor, who was a very nice old woman who taught me how to knit. I just used to go around to her house. But then I did drop it until 2014. But there was a time in school where I was standing in the queue at primary school waiting to go in, holding my knitting, standing there, knitting in the school queue. Very cool kid.
Super cool. So now you're doing a lot of digital design. How are you finding the sort of transition between the old version printmaking type of thing that you might have done when you were studying to creating digital design now?
I think it all really feeds into itself. So a lot of the reason I started doing more textiles is because I was printmaking and I wanted that feeling of creating a thing that was more solid. So I was printing onto paper and I just felt like it felt not consequential enough to me. So then to print on fabric and then to actually weave into fabric or knit into fabric the designs. I think it's just like all of these things. For me, my main motivation is just to create imagery and aesthetics that are like constant or something. Because there's something always in art school that I felt like a white space gallery was never quite enough. It didn't feel like I like the idea of experiencing art as an experience one-off, but also there's something that really appeals to me about art that you carry with you or design that just like is in the everyday. So I'm not as into doing digital stuff. A lot of that is for accessibility for me. But I also really like that, you can make these things that people can access on any device, anywhere, in so many different forms. And even the idea of like when you're designing for web, adapting for different screen sizes and stuff like that, it just has this feeling of like, it doesn't have the same limits of other kinds of design. And that's why I like designing clothes as well, because that design or that art exists anywhere that you are instead of just on the wall.
Because I guess some artists get a bit caught up in the medium. I was thinking about Alan Moore, the graphic novel comic book writer, who has always said, I write comics, and he's often dissatisfied when his work gets translated into TV or whatever, because he's like, comics is my medium. And then it's almost that you're almost enjoying the inverse of that, where you like this, your artwork is a bit like a chameleon and then can be applied to loads of different experiences or something.
Yeah. That's funny. I just finished reading Watchmen for the first time, like last week.
Oh, really? It's heavy.
Yeah. Exhausting a little bit. Yeah, I think that's a nice thing about fashion for me and creating in that kind of space, because inherently I always come back to clothing. I sometimes make wall-based stuff or, digital stuff, but I always come back to clothing because it just there's so much scope and the artwork doesn't end with the piece that you made. So there's, if you pair it, you could pair a bunch of different things you made together or with work from other designers or other people. Every item has like these different stories. Like I could make a woodcut dress if I wanted to right now, but I could also weave something or knit or crochet or any number of these things that are like completely different techniques that it appeals to that sense of wanting to move around completely, but you can like stick to this central theme.
Yeah, and I guess it's all those different sort of tactile media, all those different things that work together. I love the combination of all of those things together, or the freedom to put them together if you wanted to. Like you say, it's another expression every single time.
Yeah.
You wear something differently. You're creating a new art, a new experience.
I think that's why I'm so consistent with Instagram, is because, well, number one, I don't really totally feel like I've finished anything until I post it, because it's just like, that helps me feel like there's been some resolution. But at the same time, I do like get so excited after I've finished a piece, thinking like, what am I going to style it with? How am I going to present this piece? I always really like people's accounts who are just showing like a jumper on a hanger, because you can really enjoy the piece and like the way it's made. But I can never do that for my own pieces, because I'm like, no, I want to show it on somebody. I want to show it with like in context and how you could style it. Yeah, I just really like clothes.
I think that's the amazing thing about expression. See, I would like somebody else to do that for me. I would love that. Clothes are such a trauma for me. Ugh. I would love someone to go, oh, you can have this and put it with this. That would make me so happy. Can we talk about sort of body positivity? Because as a larger lady myself, it's one of the things that it's really hard to buy things or envisage what something's going to look like when you look at clothes that are in shops in sort of fairly narrow ranges where you look at them and it's really hard to see because nothing is designed very well for larger women.
Yeah.
And I find that really frustrating. And I know that that's sort of something you're very passionate about, is the whole sort of body positivity and making sure that clothes and things can be made in all sizes, and that people, ranges and designers and things make for a big range of sized people.
Yeah, that's something that I've been finding really frustrating, especially in the sewing community or whatever, as patterns are becoming more size inclusive, that there's I really don't agree with the term flattering and the idea of that because you're a certain shape, you can't wear certain things. And so if I accidentally say the word flattering, what I'm referring to is actually, because there's not purpose built, a pattern actually being designed to fit bigger bodies, not necessarily to flatter in the sense of
not to cover them up.
Yeah, but in genuinely actually fitting, I've just noticed there's so many of these patterns are well, they've done it, they made it bigger, but it's not, it doesn't, it's not designed for an actually bigger body, and they haven't actually done anything recently. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Minimalist Machinist on Instagram. She does so much posting about fitting and stuff like that, and currently is going through this bizarre long-term jeans journey that is just so much work, but it's bringing out so many fit problems with existing jeans patterns, and it's even come about that some companies are just launching the patterns without even having testers even touch them over a certain size, and not having any fitting process. They're just in a rush to get it done. And that, to me, is really frustrating. And I think that's the same with shops and with brands. So I think what I'm more passionate about is I think a lot of the reason people struggle with the idea of flattering is because they're I'm going to do it. I'm going to wear something I wouldn't usually wear. Then they put it on and it's oh no, this blatantly wasn't made for my body. And then they go, oh, I guess I can't wear this kind of thing because it just doesn't fit me. And I'm no, if it fit, it would look so amazing. I don't know. It's such a pet peeve of mine, because I feel it doesn't get talked about enough, because everybody's in such a justified rush to be no, anyone can wear anything. You wear that thing that cuts into you really, really painfully, because you can wear whatever you want. And I'm yeah, but still you should tell them that it cuts into you, because it shouldn't cut into you, because that hurts and it isn't comfortable to sit down in.
Well, it's the sort of simplest form of that, I always think, is if you were making a pair of jeans for a very tall person, and maybe perhaps they were a bit flared or a bit bootleg or something, you'd have to actually consider where the knees were in terms of where the flare should start, or where the bootleg bit should start. So if you just made the same jeans for everybody, regardless of whether they were 3 foot high or 6'6", then obviously that flared moment would happen in ridiculous places. If you didn't stop and think, hang on a minute, this person's got longer legs. But that's what happens when people try and design clothes for larger bodies. And so, the armholes of things become gigantic. It's just hang on a minute. You can't just make something scale it up in general. So you can't sort of go, oh, well, the sleeves would be a foot longer if everything was going up and not being graded properly.
For me, it's always the neck holes that are to my shoulders. And I'm just my neck hasn't really changed very much, actually. My head is just huge.
Yeah. And actually, it's one of those things that it wouldn't take an awful lot to be thoughtful for people to be thoughtful. And once you get the hang of it, there are some fantastic designers. I'm thinking of sort of, sewing designers like Cash Moret and people like that, who put loads of time into grading. And, once those processes are there, then you think, well, if you do the work at the beginning and you think about grading, then that'll work for everything sort of in perpetuity as you go along. But people do seem, like you say, they're so fast to want to create something to fit all sizes without any thought of personalizing it.
I appreciate that instinct, obviously, but there's a little hint of bitterness in me still where I'm like, I don't actually think it's coming from a like, we started this brand with trying to include everyone and now we need to fix it because we did it a bit fast. I think it's coming a lot of the time from a rush to try and catch up because you've realized that you weren't really being very thoughtful from the start, which I'm like, it's not helpful. Then you're actually like taking all this money from the fat community to just fund trying to maybe at some point get their patterns better so they can buy them for a second time or something. It seems like, if the patterns don't fit, but people are still paying for them, you're almost just milking the community for its money as opposed to actually being in any way supportive, which is challenging.
For those companies, it's kind of good enough, isn't it? Because it shows on the bottom line. They're like, hey, we tried this thing. We widened our audience base. We've taken, you can see that we've made money doing that. But it's not inherently starting from the design standpoint of going, this person is fundamentally a different shape.
Yeah.
And therefore there are different tensions in fabrics. And probably even like, I was a pretty big guy at one point. I was a very fat teenager and stuff. So I know the physical tensions you get when you're wearing clothes that are just off the peg. So it's almost like there's engineering that needs to be considered. There's all these different elements, isn't it, that just makes for a better experience. And sometimes it feels like if you're an unusual shape, the only time you ever get the only time I've ever worn a shirt that was brilliant was one I made myself.
Yeah. The thing that you said at the start of that as well, oftentimes I see people or companies bring out a really bad plus range and then everyone's like, oh, this is terrible, and nobody buys it again. And then they go, people really didn't want to plus size stuff from us. So I guess we won't do anymore.
Yeah, it wasn't worth our while after all, so we won't do it. Yeah.
And it's kind of weird, like my wife's 5 foot tall and she's, almost on the other end of the spectrum, as it were. But the same things happen when you're getting down into the tiny person's range. They just get the tiny versions of the normal size clothes and
just bizarre proportions.
Either.
Yeah.
Because again, I guess they just start in the middle and there's probably an algebra that you can apply to a lot of these things quite easily.
Well, it's really interesting. I've been working with a few different people who have been looking into a lot of more of the digital scope for this kind of stuff going forward, like looking into software that will generate patterns based on a 3D body scan or will use like wild amounts of accumulated data from different body shapes from different parts of the world and stuff like that to generate a sewing pattern rather than using the standard 1950s 25-year-old as the basis for their grading. It's really interesting. It does seem like the technology for the people who aren't like me, who are actually great at software and computers and stuff like that, they seem to all be doing some really, really cool stuff that hopefully could, for me, I'm like, oh, this is going to be game changing. People are at some point in the near future, there's the possibility people will be able to always have patterns custom made, not just to their measurements, but like to an actual scan of their body. You could digitally toile and stuff like that, which affects waste and all kinds of problems in the industry. So I'm kind of excited about the possibilities, but it's quite, I think it's still a ways in the future.
I mean, that leads us very neatly onto the sort of the whole concept of slow fashion and the fact that we buy a ludicrous amount of clothes that don't really fit us, that we don't really need. And really, we should be going down the road of just sort of having things that properly fit us and not so many things, and sort of trying to stop buying clothes. So, make more clothes, but stop buying clothes that end up in the waste system.
Mm-hmm. I was at a conference in first lockdown sometime.
What year was that? 2008? I can't remember now.
Years ago.
It was called Redesigning Fashion. It was about kind of intersections of race and size in ethics in fashion. And something they mentioned that was really interesting to me, that it kind of, I would say the main intersections for this are probably like size and class of this phenomenon. I can't remember exactly what it was called, but it was like anxious purchasing of when you're used to scarcity, either in your size or in your finances. When something is either cheap or your size, there's this like very anxious natural urge to be like, I have to get that so that I can, because I feel like, or I've been programmed by my circumstances to know that there's not going to be an option for me later. And so people are often doing this thing of buying the things that even if they know it's not going to fit them, it's just like, I have to have something.
I'm sure I've done that all my life. Absolutely. You see something and you think, oh, well, it's not, I don't really love it, but it's the only thing I'm going to find.
Yeah.
I know that if you rock up quite late to a sale at TK Maxx, you're not going to find anything other than what's in the middle, are you? Because I guess that is a good example of that. People seeking out fashion in places where they can find it. And, there's a scarcity there, I would have thought as well.
Yeah. I thought that was like an interesting way of understanding some of the way that I've kind of had both of those experiences on both ends, but the longer I engage with this kind of stuff, the more I'm having, because you have to give it so much more thought. And especially when you're making stuff and you know that you can make things that will fit you and are awesome according to your taste. The more I'm having to like look and relook at my relationship with it, getting stuff, because at first I was very like, I'm going to be minimalist. I'm going to only have a certain number of things, blah, blah, blah. And as time has gone by, I've had to be like, okay, no, for me, like people, actually everybody has different relationships with consumption, and we're all trapped in this capitalist mindset. But for me, I'm realizing the most sustainable thing is not to go the other way and go full minimal, get rid of everything and buy one thing a year or make one thing a year, because that's not sustainable for me, because I love stuff and not just in a like capitalist drive way, but like I think it can be a very natural human thing to just love having things, and you can still be very thoughtful about the way that you consume and the way that you make things without going whole hog, I'm getting rid of everything. Because I've definitely a few times, I'm sure in the last few years, gotten rid of everything and then repurchased everything, which then made me feel doubly, triply terrible. And I think it's like, for me, I'm realizing it's just this trying to develop some thoughtfulness about it. I always have all of my old clothes. And as soon as I meet a new person or a new person comes into my life, I'm always like, I have 5 things that I think you would like. Let me just give them to you. You can try them on. You see what you think. But if you want them, they're yours, because I think they fit your look and I think they'd be your size.
Oh, be my friend.
I think that's part of the skill, though, of like being a guide when you've got turbulent waters like that. We see programs that tell us that the world's going to rack and ruin, and you think, right, I'm going to be a vegan who, macrame's my muesli or whatever, but you can't, that's not a pragmatic solution, particularly when we're already bound up in all these stories that we've been told and that we love. I love cars because I'm a boy and I loved cars. And, when I first got the chance to buy my own car, I wanted a Pontiac Firebird like Burt Reynolds in Smokey and the Bandit, but I ended up having to get a Kia Ceed because it does better mileage. But there's all these to negotiate the relationship between what we need to do for the betterment of the world and what we want to do for the betterment of our own like inner child or whatever. It's a really difficult trick. And so like from what you're saying, there's a bit of, I'm going to take my stands in certain places but still indulge my pleasures in making and looking cool and feeling cool and all of those sorts of things, because to sacrifice everything isn't a life worth living. But to tread lightly in a cool pair of shoes is a life worth going for.
Oh, that was beautiful.
I think I fixed that metaphor just at the end there. I wasn't sure. But do you get what I mean?
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, we can't ever have these conversations without pointing out that these companies are burning extra clothes that they make, like tons and tons of clothes just that haven't even hit a shop floor. They're wasting like something like 60% of the material that they make, like fashion companies. The whole system is built around waste. And so I do think that it's very telling that companies are greenwashing. There is an impact of your personal choices, because clearly the fact that the consumer wants to have less of an impact is at least making corporations pretend that they're going to make less of an impact. You're not personally burning tons of t-shirts, so you will be okay.
Hey everybody, if you like the LoveCrafts Show, take a moment and subscribe to us on your favourite podcasting app.
Join us on the LoveCrafts Show on Spotify,
Apple Podcasts,
Google Podcasts,
and your favourite podcast app.
Can't wait for you to join us for more LoveCrafts fun and chat. So you love the undies. So, you were making underwear, you had your underwear company. How did that start?
Oh, when we're talking about feats of engineering, that's the underwear for people with big boobs. I've just always had big boobs. It's not, it's always been annoying, and companies always made, it's like once you get over a certain size, it's like, hey, do you want some lace? Because I'm only going to offer you lace, and it's only going to be beige. And I was just like a teenager, like, all my friends have nice underwear and I'm here with my beige lace bra. Like, okay. So then as soon as I was like learning sewing, that was one of the first things that I wanted to like actually make for myself. And also I've never been like, underwear has kind of got these political things of expressing quote unquote femininity or whatever. And as you get bigger and curvier, there's a further expectation to be performing a certain kind of like heterosexuality that is very like male gaze centric that I'm not comfortable with. Like, I'm not comfortable with the pressure. People can wear whatever underwear. But the fact of being over a certain size, meaning that you don't have options, is something that made me really uncomfortable. Where I was like, well, that's not how I really like to wear underwear. So I was just like excited about making things that made me feel what my version of cool or attractive or sexy was, that wasn't part of that existing acceptable system for people my size. And then everybody who followed me on Instagram at the time was like, excuse me, can I have some please? So I never really, to be honest, I shouldn't probably have ever made it into my full business, because I have always had some degree of chronic pain. But for a time, it was really fun to do that. It just wasn't physically sustainable for me.
And we'll talk about that just in a second, actually. But I wanted to say I did watch. It was so interesting looking at the bra tutorial on the stories on your Instagram. If anybody wants to know about engineering, there is engineering. I love it. The whole sort of, where the elastic goes here and here and here. It's so interesting. So I think that's wonderful. But tell us, Jamie and I have read about EDS. Just tell us a bit about that and how, obviously, like you say, it was no good to be hunched over a sewing machine. It was just too painful.
Well, yeah, EDS is the short name for Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. It's a connective tissue disorder, and it's genetic. So I think, as far as we know, I'm third generation. So it's all a very fun gift through my family. But I have the hypermobile type. There's like 5 types. And so it mostly affects my joints. It just means that the collagen, which is the stuff that holds your body together, does it regenerate or like bounce back in the same way that like a quote unquote normal abled person's collagen would. So for me, it mostly targets my joints. It can cause like just chronic pain and sometimes like dislocations and subluxations, but it also just can affect any of your systems. So it just makes you a bit sick all the time. It's good fun. But I had it when I was younger. Like, I mean, everybody who has it. But it was mostly just like, manageable pain. And I wouldn't have ever called it a disability. But it can be triggered by hormonal changes, especially in women. So after I had Ransom, who's my son, it just got way worse. So I had started my business maybe like a year before I got pregnant. And then it was just getting progressively worse, probably with breastfeeding and stuff as well. Also, the business was getting more successful. So I was like, I'm going to work more. It was a good idea. So I think I kind of spectacularly fizzled out right directly before lockdown, which, to be honest, I'm quite glad, because I don't think I could have handled running a business in lockdown with no nursery.
Oh, and I'm sure that people would have gone absolutely crazy for it too. They'd have been like, oh my gosh, look, this lady with her wonderful undies. I'm going to have some of that, because people are just shopping online, aren't they?
Yeah.
So you would have been like even more super duper busy.
But I'm actually glad that the timing worked out well, because when I stopped, because I had stopped the business stuff, I had a bit more time to do like personal development of like things I want to wear. And that's when I designed the bra pattern that you saw in my story, or not the pattern, but the way of making, which has literally saved my life in lockdown. It's the most comfortable bra in the world. So I'm really glad that I gave myself a little bit of time for like R&D to design my own perfect undergarment.
I think it's quite interesting that in your Insta profile, like, you're quite happy to say, like, to talk about your disability. Is it something, there was an interview that you did and you said that actually it's part of your identity now, whether that's like part of your brand or whatever. You can run the risk, I guess, of perhaps ending up being a bit of an advocate in those kind of directions, but it seems something that you're adjusted to and you're, I don't know, not at ease with, because it's not an easy thing to be with, but do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, well, there's something with conditions like mine that are chronic and don't have any treatment and don't have any there's no, like, well, some people who have EDS do need a wheelchair or assistance when they're walking or things like that. You know, there are ways that it can become visible, but inherently it's an inside disability. So like a lot of people who have it, it's an invisible disability. And that also, it means there's not much treatment, and it means that there's often a lot of like doubt as to its existence, and it's really hard to get diagnosed. So like, you know, I was going to the physio when I was 12 because sometimes I couldn't get out of bed to go to school because my back was so sore. But they were just like, I don't know, do some crunches. Your back is just weak. And you know, it took like 12 years before they were like, oh yeah, you actually have a genetic disorder. So I think a lot of people who have that kind of experience with disability have a similar thing to me, where it feels very exciting and empowering to finally, like, I actually think that it's fine to self-diagnose if you know what's wrong with you and your doctors are being useless, you know. But for me, when I got my diagnosis, I was just like, oh, thank you. Like, this is so, it's so, I'm always in pain, and it's making, like, now things are a little easier because I'm not doing the same work, but, you know, it was making my work life like untenable, like in agony all the time and feeling like it didn't exist. And so then to have that, yes, you're disabled, and then to find a community of other people who are experiencing the same things or similar was like extremely empowering and exciting to me. So I think I like couldn't help, but yeah, it feels very good to have that as like a part of my identity after a lot of time of big self-doubt and stuff like that. And it still is hard when you're like, my condition, a lot of the time EDS operates in flares. So you have times where it's easier and you have times where it's really difficult. And so it's still very easy to be like, oh, I'm not sick enough. I'm not disabled enough. There's not, like, I've not got enough problems to justify. But I so profoundly disagree with that. And if any of my friends are like that, I'm like, no. And so for myself, sometimes like putting those kinds of things out there, like, I'm not well, makes me, that's me being me to myself going, no, you are sick enough. It's okay. Like if you need more time, that's okay. It gives me a space to be a bit more gentle with myself, which is nice.
Mm. And I mean, as a mother, it makes it very hard because when you're feeling good and you're a mother, it's easy to have lots of fun with your kids and be on the floor or doing things, everything. If you're not feeling very well and you've got a toddler,
yeah,
that's hard too, isn't it? So tell us about Ransom.
Oh gosh, yeah. This the lockdown stuff has been so tough. Yeah, he's 3 years old, and he usually would be going to nursery and stuff, and he's actually loving life. He's so happy that we're home all the time, and and I'm like, oh, he likes nursery as well. But in the first lockdown, I was trying so hard. I was like, I'm going to try to be a really good parent, blah, blah, blah. Sitting on the floor every day, doing all this playing. I sneezed while sitting on the floor and dislocated my back and had to stay in bed for like a week and a half straight at the in the first month of lockdown, which obviously then meant that I was absolutely useless, both as a helper to my husband and as a parent. Like he couldn't even come in the bed with me because it was too sore, like the mattress shifting around. So I was like, okay, you have to actually find a balance. You can't just be like, but I think that's the thing with all parenting. This is just an extreme example because my body is broken. But it is like, I feel like that's a good representation of all of being a parent, even psychologically, where you're just like, you can't give everything all the time because you do suffer, and then you can't be a good parent if you stretch yourself too thin.
I've got a 3.5-year-old, and I was very excited recently when I discovered that one of the cartoons she's quite into also happens to teach her a bit about science. I was like, come on, that'll do. You can watch that for an hour while I go and do something else. It is hard, isn't it? And you can, like, I look after my girls 2 weekdays a week as well as on the weekends and stuff. And it's just like, you can spend so much time thinking you need to plan and do all these things and but actually just being there seems to be half the trick.
Yeah.
But it takes a long time to like settle into that, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, the first year is just, I found it really, really difficult. But now we're finding a good, I sit and I knit and I pretend to be the cast of Scooby-Doo. And Ransom runs around the room and pretends that he's Scrappy Dappy Doo right now. So that's our situation.
That sounds like a great plan, actually. I mean, my children are teenagers now, but I remember my mum saying to me, actually, it's really important to teach them what to do when there's nothing to do. In the sense that you don't have to fill every moment with crazy. I mean, I remember when my kids were at school and people would say, Monday swimming, Tuesday jiu-jitsu, Wednesday ballroom dancing, Friday scooters, and it was something that was every minute was filled. And my mum sort of took me to one side and said, you really shouldn't be doing this. You don't need to fill every moment because life's not like that. And they grow up, they're going to be thinking they have to do everything all the time with this great sense of urgency. You need to teach them what to do when there's nothing to do, and just it's okay not to do anything massive. So you can have quiet afternoons where you read a book or watch the telly, or just, you can do nothing if you want to. To run around and play Scooby-Doo is just the best thing ever because, it's in his imagination and he's Scrappy-Doo and he's having a lovely time.
I love that. I want your mom to come teach me how to not be productive all the time. It's my curse. It's so hard. It's so hard not to beat yourself up about it.
We were talking to the lovely Marley Bird in the last podcast season, and she said that she found it impossibly difficult to do nothing. She said it was because she was overly optimistic all the time. She always thought she had time to fit something else in. So she was constantly thinking, yes, I can do that. Yes, I could do that. And we do have to slow up at some point, don't we? So it's
no matter what day it is that I'm looking after the kids, between the hours of 4 and 5, I'm usually lying on the floor with them just jumping on me because that's about all I'm capable of at that point. Yeah. But in a way that seems to work. It's like,
but it's a good thing. I mean, that's a great thing. I think it's a lovely thing.
I wanted to deviate the conversation. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Because I like Glasgow, and that's where you live, right?
Yes, it is where I live.
Have you ever been to the Shamanka Kinetic Theatre?
Oh my goodness. When I was a kid, that was like, I haven't seen it maybe since I was like 15 or something, but it lives in my brain as like the coolest thing I've ever seen in my entire life.
Basically, to those of you that don't know, the Shamanka Kinetic Theatres, it was put together by a guy called Edward Bursudsky. I did a bit of research. He was like a sculptor, wasn't he, who made things out of all metalwork. And basically, they have these shows. You go into this room and there's, like 20 different automatons and stuff like that. And you'll be in one bit of the room and a light will shine down and suddenly some music will start playing and this machine will whir into life and it has all these bits and pieces on it. And they're really brilliant. And there's like a few... Because when you look on their website, you can see the videos of some of them, and it was really quite nice to kind of reminisce on some of them. There's one called The Last Eagle of the Highlands, which is made in 1994, and there's like these two animal skulls, and they're sort of attached to bodies with wings, and it rotates around on this sort of almost like a candelabra sort of thing, with some spinning wheels at the bottom while a Scottish poem is played over the top of it. And it's like that will happen and then the lights will go off. And there's one called the Crusader that's basically made out of loads of Singer sewing machine tables. My favourite one was called the Flying Bull. And it's this big winged creation made out of metal, and it has these, I think there's a couple of monkeys on the top, is that what I wrote down? Yeah, and painting pedals and stuff like that. And right at the end of it, there's this little creature that comes out and it's holding a little sign, and the sign says, subscribe to the LoveCrafts Show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It's amazing. And he made that in 2012. How prescient is this man? But honestly, no, if you ever go to Glasgow and if you can ever book a slot on it, it is truly an amazing show. Like you come out of it and you're just like mind blown completely. So
that was divine.
That was amazing,
lovely.
Wasn't it? Thanks. You're welcome.
I just want to say one of the things, obviously, that we love to do with our children, just going back to that now, and I was sort of talking about reading books and things, is that it is, of course, extremely good for us to sit down and read a book, and for our children to sit down and read a book, but for us to read a book. And so one of the thrilling things about this new season of the podcast is that we've got the fabulous Holly Buttress to introduce us to our new book snug that's called The Snug. Holly gives us our lovely book reviews of the things she's reading. S-N-U-G. Holly, welcome to the podcast.
Welcome to the LoveCrafts Show, Holly.
Thanks for having me,
How
guys.
are you, Holes?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. It's been lovely listening to you talk to Lydia.
What have you been reading, Holly? She reads all the time. I don't read anything.
She reads like... How many books do you read a month, Hol?
Last month I read 12.
Ooh.
So
it's unbelievable. It's
Wow.
brilliant. This is why, if you need a book recommendation, Holly's your girl, because she knows.
I mean, last month was it was a bit out there, and it was mainly due to the fact that I binged the Bridgerton books within like the space of like a week. So
Bridgerton. We must talk about Bridgerton. Have you, Lydia and Jamie, have you watched Bridgerton on Netflix?
I have not yet. No, it's too sexy for me.
No.
Oh, it's a bit saucy. That's true. But so we've been talking about this in LoveCrafts and watching Bridgerton, and Holly has read the books. So what happened?
they were just the perfect like lockdown palate cleanser for life. The show came at the exact right time, and then as soon as I watched it, I was like, I need to read the books. It's just, they're so light and fluffy, and there's 8 in the series, and they're all from each sibling's perspective, and they're just like cheesy love stories.
You know, it's so interesting, isn't it? We love to read books that challenge us and books that push our buttons, but there is still room in amongst all of that sort of diet of literature. There's always room for a bit of cheesy romance.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, what I'm reading at the moment is it's a debut by Caleb Azuma Nelson. It's called Open Water, and it's also a love story about 2 Black British artists. And it's just following their journey of falling in love with themselves. And it's a really tiny book. I didn't expect it to be so short. It's like under 150 pages.
I mean, that says a lot for a very talented writer, doesn't it? If a short,
Yeah.
Trying to cram it in there, looking at the sort of the blurb that goes with it, they're trying to make their mark in a city that by turn celebrates and rejects them. So I'm taking it that they go through all sorts of traumas.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not too far into it. I sort of made the mistake of thinking that because it was short, it would be a fast read. But each sentence is so beautifully crafted. It's like reading art. Every word is really carefully chosen, and it's very tender and heartfelt and quite intense, but at the end of the day, it's a love story. It's, you know.
And isn't it interesting? I mean, that's just got to be the ultimate compliment for an author, that they're painting pictures with beautiful prose. I mean, it's just, we'll put all the details in our show notes of these books. So that's what you're reading at the moment. What do you recommend that we should be reading?
The book I'd really like to recommend to you all is a memoir by Roxane Gay. It's called Hunger, and it's a memoir essentially focused on her relationship with her body and the relationship she's had with it from childhood into adulthood, and the violence that's been done to her by others and by herself. It's really deeply personal, very honest, sometimes funny and difficult to read, but it was one of those books that just really struck me, and I felt very seen by it, and I really admire her as a writer. It's a really beautiful memoir, and it's one I think needed to be written, and Roxane was the right person to write it.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. What are you going to read next? When you finish this one, what's the next one?
The next book on my TBR, my to be read, is I Am Not Your Baby Mother by Candice Braithwaite. It's a non-fiction collection of essays, I think, about Black motherhood, part memoir, part manifesto. And it's a topic I'm really fascinated by anyway, motherhood. And I'm hoping this book will give me a bit of insight into what that's like from a Black woman's perspective. It was only recently that I realised that Black mothers are 5 times more likely to die in childbirth in comparison to their white counterparts.
It's almost, if it wasn't true, it would be unbelievable, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I just can't I can't get my head around that. I just can't. It's horrific.
So that's next on the agenda, and I've had really, really good things, so I'm excited to pick that one up.
Well, thank you, Holly. Those are really fantastic inspiration. We'll put all the details of Holly's picks onto the show notes so you'll be able to catch up. And then next episode, there'll be a new crop. Mm-hmm. Very exciting.
All right.
Thanks, Holly.
Thanks, guys.
So, Lydia, tell us, what's next for you? What exciting things are coming up? Not that everything's particularly not that exciting in lockdown, but...
Not much. I kind of... Part of the reason that I picked up knitting again lately is to stem my inner, I don't know, like productivity-driven boss, me being my own boss for so many years. I feel like I've spent so much time kind of abusing my own labor, expecting way too much of myself, basically playing the bad, mean boss to myself for so many years that I was like, well, I've missed knitting for a really long time, and it hurt my hands too much. But I fixed a few things about the way that I was knitting, and I got some special needles, and it's been working for me. And it's one of these things. It is so painfully slow and so like involved and engaging. I can't do what I do with crochet or sewing, which is to just be like, focus on the end goal, get it done as fast as possible, try to find a way to make it monetize it. I'm like, no, you have to be slow. You have to just sit. Yeah, you can make your design. You have to sit. You have to enjoy the process. You have to get into the fact that it's slow, and nobody can afford to ever buy this from you and pay you fairly for your time. So in a way, I'm kind of trying to set myself free a little bit. I'm kind of right now resisting falling into any specific goals or work kind of stuff, and just picking up random little bits of freelancing and giving myself a space for the first time in just years and years, especially because it's still lockdown and, you know, Ransom's still at home all the time, and just give myself some space to actually be creative and slow and enjoy my work in the process. And I'm already like, after maybe a couple months of doing that, I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to work on my art practice again. I want to start doing some research. For quite some time, I haven't had the headspace, especially with a small child, to part of what I loved about doing fine art versus design or just making was that process of research and concept and really like reveling in the excitement of what the meaning of what you're making and the content. And I just didn't give myself any time to think about that for years at this point. And now I'm like, maybe I'm ready to like make a project again and like actually do some research and make what would be in my head more of a practice, not just making for the sake of making. So I'm quite excited. I feel a lot more inspired about it than I have done. I think I've been more driven by productivity for the last few years than by anything else. And right now I'm feeling a bit more driven by inspiration, which is a huge win, for me.
That's really huge.
I can see that though, because the thing is, what I've learned from you is some people would say you were an omni threat because you've got so many different skills and talents and stuff. But it feels to me like you'll go down a direction, but then another idea will take you off. So the fact that you're giving yourself the space to just go with your flow. And I was thinking earlier, you said that you still hold on to all your other clothes. I can sort of imagine you somehow producing an installation out of half of them because that's the way the mood has taken you or something. So that to me seems fascinating.
I'm totally like, I have every jumper I've ever made ransom, and I'm like, what kind of show can I do out of every jumper I've ever made ransom? These kind of, I think there's like a thing for me. I really, really struggled with postpartum depression and my mental health since Ransom was born. And I think he's finally getting to an age where I have a bit of space to process it. And I had a really traumatic pregnancy as well. And I feel like it's nice that I finally feel like my brain has like this slight amount of room to start processing things. And I really enjoy doing that through making. And so that's like another fun, like not fun, like haha, but like it does feel like it's very like the whole process of making is really good for my mental health anyway. But then to have the space to like think about it and not just like work through it is pretty exciting.
Yeah, because I think that's the difference, isn't it? Is that making in mental health is, it is so helpful because you can go through the whole sort of all the steps of creating something and making something. It's very soothing and it's lovely and everything. But then there comes a point that for you, making something plus is a sort of a much more involving scenario where you want to be inspired and create something. You're not just doing sort of mindful knitting to keep yourself, from worrying and to sort of focus on the stitches. You're actually now at that moment where you can be inspired to create something. Does that make sense? Sort of,
yeah.
You're doing actually sort of design knitting plus making plus. Now that you're in that room.
For the listener, we can see each other. I've been trying very, very hard not to fidget, but I'm very stimmy. I'm always moving my hands and feel quite like uncomfortable when I'm not doing something with my hands. And so, as well as like a focusing of my mind thing, I find that like knitting and crochet are just like a very, very helpful way to direct that energy. It just becomes like a stim in itself, which is quite nice.
Very nice.
But yeah, rather than it just being some kind of mindfulness / stimming, being able to direct all of that in together is really exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, very.
Welcome to the LoveCrafts Showcase, where we feature makers that we think you need to know about. This time, I've chosen embroidery artist Nicole Choi. Her style of anarchic hand embroidery over photos and other pictures is something you need to check out. So let's find out more.
Hi, my name is Nicole Choi. On the internet, I'm known as That's So Nicole. I'm an embroidery artist and graphic designer based in London. My work is messy, brash, and disruptive, and I'm known for hand embroidering on top of photographs using traditional techniques and unconventional techniques when it comes to hand embroidery and traditional stitching. My practice aims to just disrupt perfection and destroy this idea that hand embroidery has to be one thing, and instead broadening the horizons of what it could be and where it could go for the youth in the future. What drives my creativity is definitely survival, but also the fact that I get so bored easily, and creativity helps me get rid of that boredom and just do something. Do you enjoy any other crafty pursuits? I recently tried making cards, which was really fun, and I might incorporate that into my work of art with hand embroidery. I also have started trying to knit, but I'm terrible at knitting and it's really challenging for me. The last time I touched the knitting needle was probably in the beginning of New Year, and I haven't touched it since, but I would really like to get back into that and try it out. I think embroidery is just something that I do all the time, that it blurs the line between personal and professional because I genuinely love it, and it de-stresses me at the same time. It stresses and de-stresses me. I think my favorite thing about being a maker is the freedom. Like I said before, hand embroidery in particular makes me feel very liberated and gives me the ability to express things that I can't really say out loud, or things that have been stuck in my mind that I didn't know I still had bottled up within me. And whilst also making something functional at the same time, I think that balance of like form and function really keeps me inspired and interested when I'm making stuff, whether it's packaging or even my own artwork. Where do you see the future of your craft and your community going? It'll be more relevant in the context of more youth being able to do it and make it a career, whether it be like creating album artwork for people or incorporating hand embroidered techniques into graphic design. I definitely see that being something that would be not seen as a thing that you just do with your grandparents or the older community, but something that the youth can have on their own and empower themselves by making it a career.
It's been very cool having you on the show. Thanks for being the first person on the first show of the second series of the legend that is the LoveCrafts Show.
I think you've been the perfect first guest. I'm thrilled to bits.
Yeah. It's been really cool. There's so many different things to talk about. We never know where these conversations are going to go. Sometimes we have a sheet that tells us what we're going to do. It's like a map and we just throw it away and we head for the sunset. And I think today it was all right. We had a good time. So thanks for being on the show. We'll put all the details of how people can find you in the show notes and all that sort of thing. And as is our way, I suppose, thanks to everybody for listening to the LoveCrafts Show. My name's Mr. X-Stitch.
And I'm Merion.
Last night, I was dreaming I was locked in a prison cell. When I woke up, I was screaming, calling out your name. Whoa. And the judge and the jury, they all put the blame on me. The blame on me. They want to tell my story. They want to hear my plea. Only you can set me free, because I'm guilty of LoveCrafts in the first degree. Thank you very much, everybody.
Oh, it was so much build up.
Superb.
I could have gone for a whole Bananarama chorus there. It's a lot longer.
It was great. So. Do you know, Lydia, you are such an inspiration.
Yeah,
I think
honestly,
you're amazing. Lydia. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me.